And now we look at section 6-4, the skeletal system. And in this video, we will cover a little bit of an overview of the skeletal system. The skeletal system forms the physical foundation of the body. And so that gives us a structure. For example, if there was a building being developed, and so we all know that there's an initial framing that goes in place, and so this is the framing, the that allows us to have for the body. And the skeletal system serves many important functions. It provides the shape and the form for our bodies, and then in addition to that, what else does it do? It supports, because a lot of things are connected to the skeletal system, to the bones, and primarily we have the skeletal muscles, which are the muscles that will help in moving the joints and allows us to have certain strength to be able to stand still. And so a lot of that type of supportive elements are part of the skeletal system. Then we have the protecting aspect. For example, we have our ribs. So our ribs, and what do? They, around here, they protect our lungs, heart, and key vital organs that are in that place. That's one of the protection as well. So the protecting, supporting, protecting, and obviously allowing the bodily movement. So if we have our skeleton and it needs to move, what do we have for that purpose? We have muscles that are connected to these joints and allows the muscles to move through. One muscle contracts while the other one will relax, and so it allows sort of the movement within these joints to take place. Then also, not only that, but within the skeleton, within the bones, we also have bone marrow. Bone marrow, and the function of that is to produce the blood, because blood in itself, and the cells, that when you have the red blood cells or the white blood cells, they do not have within themselves a nucleus. So there is no nucleus, no DNA, and there is no process where the cell will divide, no division. So if this indicates any form of division, we'll say none of that. It does not divide, doesn't have the time or the ability or the necessity of red blood cells dividing, because they have to be very active in carrying oxygen. So they have a iron in them, in the protein part of that cell, and it binds with O2, and they're carrying that around. They don't have time to be dividing. And so where is the blood produced? Well, it's produced in the bones, in the center of the bones. Bones have these active cells. So if this is a bone, let's say this is a bone, within the marrow of that bone, we have living tissue. And the living tissue is the bone marrow that will then produce blood cells, and those blood cells seep out of the bones. And bones have little openings, and so when the blood comes through, it goes into is channeled into the blood vessels, and then goes back to into the heart area, and then begins to circulate through the body. And so that's the function of the bone marrow. So again, we talked about supporting, protecting, allowing the body to move, and then producing blood, and then storing minerals such as calcium. So what is the purpose of the bones? One of the things is storing calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate within them. So what we have is cartilage. When a child is born, what we have is cartilage. Is that cartilage? And so then the calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate begin to get deposited. So as the child is growing, the elongation of those cartilages is happening as well. And once that elongation and the development has ceased, now you slowly begin to get calcification of that. And that's where the deposit happens. And that's the storing of the minerals that are going to be needing for the strength of the bone structure. Here we look at the overall skeletal system that we have in the body, and we have number of different bones. We do have sections of the bone. So we have the head section, we have the thoracic section right here, and we did talk about the protective nature of these the ribs. And also, if you can see, the pelvis is designed to be protective of the organs and the development of a child as well, and to support that. Then we do have a certain strength that is given to each of these bones that helps us to be protective of other organs as well. So then talking about the area, we do have the skull area, and then we have the facial area that we will be looking at, and then we also have the arms, those that move, and in other words, help us in creation of movement, and our leg systems as well. So, and then our fingers that we have. So we can subdivide the body or the skeletal system into various areas and look at their functionality and then how it's designed. Now, when we talk about bones, we talk about joints. And when we talk about joints, we often hear people often complain of joint pain. And the important point here is, in the did you know, is that, however, the pain is usually caused by inflammation of the tissue, supportive tissue surrounding the joint, and not by the joint itself. So we do have in the joint, we have the socket here, and then the bone that's connected here. Let's just say a ball and the socket model. That's the most of our joints. So this is a joint, and some rubbing does happen here when we are moving our arms or our feet or some aspect. But what's getting inflamed in this area, the inflammation that we talk about right here, inflammation, is of the tissue, the supportive tissue that is aligned here. And so that supportive tissue becomes inflamed, and that's what causes us the pain. So it's not the joint itself, because joint itself is just a ball and socket model. It just moves and doesn't have any sensation on its own. It's calcified bone and doesn't have any sensation. So, but it's the tissue that's surrounding it. Second aspect of it, so this is did you know A, and then did you know B, and let's, in the B section, it says you have over 230 movable as well as semi-movable joints in your body. And so movable, for example, we have our arms move, our legs move, and various joints that do move. But there are a number of movement, for example, within our skull, we have various areas that are subdivided, and they're designed to move a little bit, and so not to have this extensive move. We can't take our skull and move it in various directions. But as the child is forming, as the child is coming out of the womb, we've seen some heads that have gotten elongated, and the doctors then have to kind of put a little bit of pressure and bring the baby's skull back into shape. And that's because it's very pliable. Why is it pliable? Because even the skull has movable, semi-movable joints. And so in that sense, babies are very, very flexible. And as we get older, there's calcium deposit, and those movements become very, very limited. But again, the concept here is that there's large number of joints, and most of them are movable, and there are quite a number of them that are semi-movable joints. Then the word osteology is the study, and we know that ology, like biology, is the term for study. So the question is, what is oste? And os means bone. So osteology is the study of the anatomy, structure, and function of the bones. And the bone, os, means bone, and used as a prefix in many medical terms, such as osteoarthritis, a joint disease. Another concept is that the skeleton has 206 bones that form a rigid framework to which the softer tissues and organs of the body are attached. So the skeletal has quite a large number of bones, and within this framework, like we talked about a building, it comes with a framework first, and then the softer tissues and organs are attached to that. And what organs are attached to the body? We have definitely skeletal muscles. That those are the organs that are attached, and then to those muscles, we have other organs that are being attached, and all through what? Connective tissue. Everything is being joined together by connective tissues. And so here's an example. Muscles are connected to the bone by how? Tendons. So tendons are the connective tissue, and that's what happens. You have a bone here and you have muscle here. How are they connected? Through the tendons. And then bones are connected to each other by ligaments. And so if you have a bone connected to a bone, for example, how we talked about a socket here, and we have a ball. So we have a moving a bone that's going to be moving, or we have let's say a bone that doesn't have a socket like this, but does kind of is closely and does have a bit of division in here. Well, how are these connected? Through ligaments. So ligaments create a supporting environment for these movements, moving joints, I would say. So bone to bone is ligament, bone to muscle is tendon. The place where bones meet one another is typically called a joint. And so now, the bone tissue is composed of several types of bone cells embedded in a web of inorganic salts, mostly calcium and phosphorus, and collagenous and ground fibers. So, what are these bone tissues or bone tissue? It has what? Bone cells. And so what are we talking about here? The bone is continuously being shed off, and a new bone is being formulated. And what does that? What creates that bone formation? That happens with the live cells. And live cells are the form of they have within themselves collagen and other fibers functioning. And so the web gives the bone strength, and the fibers give the bone flexibility. And so we generally think of bone as a very strong, as a very, you might think, a non-living, but the truth is, as this portion is saying, is that there are bone tissues, living cells that are producing the bone and allowing the bone to be a flexible development in the development stages. And if that development does not happen, then what do we get? We get osteoporosis. A little bit of review here. The primary function of the skeletal systems are to give shape and support to the body, protection, which is protect various internal structures and organs, serves as an attachment for muscles and acts as levers because of joints to produce body movement. Then it helps to produce both white and red blood cells. So we talked about the bone marrow. Bone marrow gives bone marrow will produce white blood cells. Well, bone marrow will produce red blood cells as well as white blood cells. And then it stores most of the body's calcium supply as well as phosphorus, magnesium, and sodium. So it does store number of minerals as well. And our final thought is that the joint, what is a joint? Is the connection between two or more bones of the skeleton. There are two types of joints. There's movable, such as elbows, knees, and hips. And then we have immovable joints as well, such as pelvis or skull, which allow little or no movement. And earlier we talked about semi-movable. So they move, for example, our skull and our pelvis. They are certain bones have a little bit of gaps in them, and that is the reason for those gaps is so that there is certain amount of mobility or movement just for the sake of protection. If our skull gets struck with something or gets pressurized in any way, at least there's some give. Otherwise the bone would then begin to fracture.